I'm going to do a little bit of reading today, but it's going to be a short show. I just woke up and whew, kind of a rough sleep last night. So bear that in mind when I'm reading today. Welcome to the show, and I will start right away. Having in mind God's great purpose to fully engage the affection of all his creatures, it is evident that the prime ingredient for their response to his love is a knowledge of him. The process of revealing God is the problem of the eons. If God should be always seeking to reveal himself, he would never succeed in his purpose. Indeed, if infinity were needed to make him known, then his creatures would always be infinitely short of such knowledge. God never speaks to us in terms of infinity, for we cannot understand it. He has provided a definite period for self-revelation, called the Aeonian times. When these are past, the process is complete. God is all in all, and all the factors such as sin and evil which are no longer needed are discarded. The great purpose of God during the eons is to provide a background for the display of his love. What would be the simplest plan to produce this? Shorn of details, all that is needed is that each of his creatures should have, according to his capacity, such an experience of evil and its fruits as will enable him to apprehend the good, which God will provide after the eons are past. Thus we have established the necessity and utility of evil in God's universe for the period of the eons. We will now consider the details of the divine operations in connection with the sinner. The groundwork of the plan is very simple. The sinner experiences evil that he may know good. He knows good that he may love God, the giver of good. The result is intensified by making the evil not only calamities and misfortunes over which mankind has no control, but by making evil the result of the sinner's sins, and by hedging him in with law, leading to transgression, and by giving sin a quality which offends the feelings of God. No one can or will object that God should be good to his creatures after the consummation, the real beginning of the perfect universe. But that goodness would all be lost on creatures who knew no evil. Hence, no one will question the justice of any plan for making that goodness effective by filling their hearts with gratitude to God and in satisfying his heart by their response, so that God is just, far more than just, in sending each one of his creatures into a world of sin and sorrow and grief and pain, and in using any means which impresses upon them the lesson taught to our first parents in the garden. We must digest the knowledge of evil ere we can enjoy the knowledge of good. And this goes on as far as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, where it was in the midst of the garden where God had planted it. The process through which God is putting mankind in preparation for their place in the consummation is very complex. We can best understand it by grasping first the grand outlines and leaving the dimmer details for later contemplation. We have said that all that would be absolutely necessary for the realization of God's purpose would be the introduction of each of God's creatures into the sphere of unmixed evil for a limited time away from God. Yet practical experience teaches us that such a method would demand a very long period and produce comparatively meager results. It lacks the great force which is the prime factor in the acquisition of all knowledge. Evil alone lacks contrast. It must be seen in the light of good. Wrong must be viewed in the presence of right. Hence, the Aeonian existence of every man is divided into three stages characterized by destruction, judgment, and salvation. He glimpses evil in the world by the feeble flicker of conscious or human justice until it involves him in death. In resurrection, he sees evil in the light of God's justice. In the consummation, he contrasts it with God's salvation. These three grades completely equip each one for the enjoyment of God's goodness and love. It is necessary to pause at this point to vindicate God's justice in his dealings with those who are not saved until the consummation. If all mankind should die in sin and should stand before the great white throne to be judged, and none saved until the consummation, the righteousness of God's way with them could readily be justified on the grounds already set forth. The very nature of endless bliss is such that those can quaff the cup of bliss most deeply who have drained the dregs of evil. Sin is an essential precursor and preparation for endless happiness. But strong objection has been raised to the length and intensity of suffering as unwarranted and severe. This may be met in two ways. The difficulty depends on an exaggerated, unscriptural impression of the length and terrors of judgment, and a failure to see it in its proper proportion to the bliss to which it leads. The happiness into which the eons usher mankind will be endless, while absolute infinity is practically outside the sphere of human knowledge. Any mathematician could tell us something of its relative value in such a problem as that which is before us. We will to fully cover every possible period of time. Suppose that the sinner suffers during the whole course of the eons, though even Adam could not suffer so long, for he did not come upon the scene until after the commencement of the eons. And we will, for the sake of definitiveness, give the eons a length of 24,000 years. To us, this seems interminable. Yet, in comparison with the period of after the eons, it is literally next to nothing. To God, 1,000 years are as a day is to us, which is when it is past. To him, the whole course of the eons is but as a month to us when it has gone by. In the light of eternity, no period of suffering, whatever its limits, can be deemed excessive. But no sinner suffers for 24,000 years. It is not at all probable that the average sinner will suffer for 50 years, including his life on earth and the judgment period, so that the period which we have reduced to zero in comparison with infinity is at least 5,000 times too long. And however we cannot divide 0 by 5,000 to any advantage, we will let it rest at that. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. Let it rest at that for a minute. Okay, I'm extremely tired. I didn't get much sleep, so that's what I read today. I love you all in the Lord. I will see you tomorrow. I need more rest, and grace and peace to you.